All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to Arts Plus Change, hosted by the University of Rochester's Institute for the Performing Arts in partnership with the Office of Equity and Inclusion, the Paul J. Burgett Intercultural Center, 540 West Main, Incorporated, Create a Space Now, Eastman Institute for Music Leadership, the Warner School, and the Rochester Fringe Festival. My name is Missy Full-Smith, and my pronouns are she, her. And I'm your conference host for this session, and the monitor is Hannah Felber, who's right next to me, at least on my screen. We would like to acknowledge, with respect, the Seneca Nation, known as the Great Hill People, or Keepers of the Western Door of the Haudenosaunee. We take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers on whose ancestral lands the University of Rochester currently resides in what is now called Rochester, New York. As we come together, we also want to honor the many lives tragically taken too soon in recent events by acknowledging the need for a commitment to constant action and attention surrounding the systemic issues that continue to impact each of us to this day. While we have encouraged each presenter to make every effort to create brave and safe space, we would like to encourage you to attend these sessions in the way that you need to attend. While we know discomfort allows for growth, we would like to remind you that you have agency to make decisions that keep you safe as we embark on potentially difficult content discussions. And as we are all here to learn and grow, we welcome you to challenge ideas, but we ask that you agree to challenge the idea and not the person. We also want to remind you that individual presenter views do not necessarily represent the official ideas or beliefs of the university, the institute, or its partners. The presenter has shared that today's session will include discussions of race from a cultural lens. And in order to enable live transcription in your Zoom view, please click the arrow to the right of the live transcript box to view. You can also hide comments, and you can drag that box to anywhere in your screen. We are recording today's session, so please note your spoken, written comments and image may be included as well as transcript. And in order to protect your privacy, we invite you to rename your profile with your first name only and your pronouns if you feel comfortable. Breakout rooms will not be recorded. Because we do have back-to-back sessions tonight, there's one other artist after Ashley. We will end promptly at the end time. We'll have a 10-minute break and then we will return. And then a collective discussion of both of those sessions will happen promptly at the end of that session, and that will take place at 8:30. And that will last for 15 minutes till 8:45. So without further ado, one more thing. If you would like to post on social media because you feel inspired by something you've experienced, please use the hashtag ArtsChange22. And now I'm honored to welcome our presenter, Ashley Campbell, who is presenting tonight's session called Beyond Representation, Evolving the Narratives of Identities on Screen. Hooray!
Woohoo! All right. Hello, everyone. It is certainly a pleasure to share space with you, be in company with you. Hopefully, you will be able to lean into some of the engagement opportunities that I have kind of slated for our time.
Ashley, you froze. We'll give you a second to come back. There you go. There you are.
Oh, do you see me now? Hear me now?
We do. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You froze for just a moment, but you're back.
Oh, yes. Now I see the little icon to say it's unstable, but we good. We're all good. So, with that, I am going to go ahead and share my screen, and I will still be able to see you in the process. And so tonight, our time together is Beyond Representation, Evolving the Narratives of Identities on Screen. And just wanted to kind of engage you a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Washington, D.C. I'm a double alum of the University of Rochester. I've been serving as a staff member at the U of R for about 7 years. I also teach in the Warner School, as well as I teach in a department called Integral and Transpersonal Psychology at the California Institute of Integral Studies. Really amazing work there, primarily focusing on arts-based research methods. I'm one of the global co-chairs for the Black Alumni Network. And for more than 30 years, I have professional classical dance experience, which is truly my heart's work at, at best. For our time together, my research is really where we're going to kind of play with. Um, my focus areas is really in Black identity, television narratives, and media, also speculative fiction, and something called Afrofuturism. We won't necessarily touch on those topics tonight, but you are more than welcome to ask me some questions about that. And a lot of my reading and most of my time is rooted in Black and African centered psychology and ethnic psychology. So, if you're talking about Asian identities, you're talking about white American identities, you're talking about Latinx identities or indigenous peoples. I definitely take pleasure in studying the psychology that makes up those cultural groups and many other groups that actually exist out there as well. So, to kind of anchor us into the conversation for tonight, um, I want to just share with you is that since as a little girl, um, one of the biggest things that I just always paid attention to were the narratives that were on screen. And in particular, dinner time for our family, there will always be a television show kind of playing in the background, and my parents and I having conversation about our days, right? So me talking about school, my mom talking about what happened at work, and my dad, of course, talking about what happened at work. And we basically kind of acted as our own therapy for one another, right? Laughing at our pain, really engaging in our struggles, those types of things were essentially commonplace for dinner time. And so some of the things that were playing in the background were a television show that came out in the 1980s and went into the 1990s called A Different World. So really seeing, these lives of Black Americans portrayed on screen, talking about their experiences at a fictitious school called Hillman College, which was identifiable as a historically Black college and university. Or, just constantly laughing until your sides just hurt at the situational comedy show called Martin. And, you would see Martin Lawrence, the actor and comedian, portray so many different characters, whether it was, he was dressing up as caricatures of other individuals, as a cop or a hairstylist or his mom. All these different elements would come out and we would laugh at them, but it was so much there were so many underlining stories that were also kind of breathed in that work as well. And so my parents and I, we would talk about that during dinner time, and it was amazing to see how the connections between what was experiencing, what they were experiencing at work, and what I was experiencing at school had this interesting alignment of what we were seeing portrayed on screen. Or the television show that really got me inspired in something called entrepreneurship, right? Didn't quite understand what that meant as a 6 and 7 year old person, but I was amazed by living single. And so watching these four women, just really be able to navigate the world as Black women, just trying to understand, what does it mean to be a fashion designer, or what does it mean to be an attorney, or what does it mean to actually own your own magazine company, right? Interestingly, I don't know if you all know, but this television show, Living Single, actually was the framework for the classic American show Friends. So if you've ever watched the show Friends, essentially the concept actually came from this television show that you see portrayed here. And then the iconic American television show that became, the American television show was The Cosby Show. Of course, we were watching a Black family portrayed on screen, and we watched kind of like an upward middle class family actually really go through their experiences of having a large family, people leaving, going to college, coming back, never leaving, all of those nuances kind of breathed in there. Essentially, watching those episodes, yes, we would laugh at them, but we also found connection to what was actually going on in their lives. And so this is what, for me as a young person, these were normal things that were actually happening on screen, and trying to unpack our lived experiences at the same time. But the funny thing is that, when you look at those images, for a while in my life, I was just trying to understand, well, how do you untangle this concept, this socialization of this American dream concept? How do we understand those narratives that we saw on screen, where it just seemed as though you had individuals just living their lives, and trying to unpack what this concept of, you haven't made it until you've acquired a house with a white picket fence, a dog, married with 2.5 children, right? So what does that mean, right? How do we understand that? Especially as a young Black girl trying to understand, well, that's not my experience. I wasn't raised in a household where we had a dog and a white picket fence. We had a house, but we didn't have quite that narrative that had been carved out for us. And of course, that ideology or concept has been expanded. And yes, we now have spaces where, the idea of the American dream is more about, it's not about where you were born or what class you were born into, but really breathing into the idea of kind of creating your own success. And you could be upwardly mobile if you decided to. However, the caveat to all of this, which is a beautiful definition, a beautiful reimagination, is when individuals haven't had an opportunity to really understand, well, what does success look like for me in this kind of body, this figure or statue that I've been depicted as on screen? How do I refashion my mind to really see or carve out a successful path for myself, right? And so our lives on screen, really, for me, in my research and just over the years, I just became really interested in just understanding what was happening, right? What is happening to how Asian lives are depicted, how Black lives are depicted, how Latinx lives are depicted on screen. And so what I notice is that there's this very generic formula of how television stories try to create these situations, whether it's comedy or drama, to basically say this is what the Latin American experience is, so this is what the Black American experience is. And it was interesting to just be able to see the interesting arc over the decades. And the primary undercurrent for all of this is mainstream American television, right? We can call out shows like Leave It to Beaver or I Dream of Jeannie and instantly think of episodes from those television shows and what they represented. And those essentially became the formula for how we understand what it meant to be entertained, or how we understand what a man woman relationship should look like and feel like. All those different things kind of really steep into our socialization experience. And sometimes it make it very difficult for us to work our way out of whatever that experience may actually be. And so I really leaned into this concept of this cultivation theory, where essentially you could watch something on television and have this image in your mind of, what is a gangbanger, and literally you can't work yourself out of that image because you've seen a series of images that may all portray a young Black male with a hoodie on, and now that's what, like your mind has accepted the fact that that equals, young Black male equals gangbanger. And so even now to this day, we're still struggling with working ourselves away from those images to basically just say that that is what the narrative is. And so, we got a lot of internal work to do to be able to say we got to distance ourselves from those images that have laid such massive imprints on our brains. And so what we now have that I'm seeing that's happening on television is this niche concept, right? So it's this interesting play of, now seeing a Black woman who's a professor at an institution, and she's teaching people about how to work yourself out of a murder, right? How to unpack a crime story. Or really seeing a story like Queen Sugar, where you see a Black family portrayed on screen, and they're really trying to hold on to their legacy. You know, they have a farm and they're really trying to make sure that it stays within the family tree and it doesn't go out and then, you know, that their product isn't sold and it's just tortured essentially. That's the essence of what Queen Sugar is about. Or even something more interesting in the sense of, you know, accepting the fact that the Big Bang Theory does more than, of course, just cause you to laugh. It was one of my favorite shows, but it's a show that really gives you a niche insight into people who are very intelligent, you know, scientists, individuals who work at an institution where they're constantly trying to come up with something creative to change the world because that's just the space in which they live in. And we get to unpack all of the different nuances and experiences that they have as couples, as friends, and all of that goodness. Or a niche show on the BET Plus network. It's called the Miss Pat Show, right? Rethinking how do we unpack a woman who is the star of the show, who was once selling drugs and decided to reform her life and married someone who said, "Look, I accept all of what has happened to you in the past. We're going to live our lives, and I want you to go and work on being a comedian." Very different type of storyline that we are seeing now. We don't, I mean, that's just unheard of. We wouldn't have experienced that back in the 1980s or even the 70s. It would have just been like, no, that's not going to work because it doesn't fit into that classic American cultural frame. Or a television series that is actually pretty engaging is called The Good Fight. You know, working at these two women that are pictured here, they work at a law firm that was historically a black law firm, and then it turned into a multicultural law firm. And so you have one of the primary characters trying to figure out, well, what does this mean for me? I thought that I was eventually going to be a part of an all woman law firm. And so unpacking all the different nuances of what does that mean for her identity and what she's latched herself onto as the series kind of progresses. And then the last one I have for you is a beautiful show that I think is really timely, called Grace and Frankie. And so many years ago, we had an opportunity to watch Golden Girls, where you had a representation of older, seasoned women who were experiencing whatever kind of stories that they were having with amongst one another. And then that storyline kind of fell flat, right? We didn't have any more stories like that on screen. With Grace and Frankie, we're being reintroduced to seasoned adults who really are reformatting their lives, who are still living their best lives, coming up with business ideas and concepts, grappling with a shift in their marriages. Both individuals experienced where their husbands decided to date one another and as well as marry one another. And so unpacking what does that shift and feel like for them has been huge. All of these narratives have shifted the way in which we actually understand ourselves. And so the big question that we're always left with is do we want to keep going down this path? Do we want to continue to force the society to say, okay, we got to think about these stories even more, or do we want to go back to what it was prior, right? So really big questions that we have to unpack on a normal basis, on a routine basis. And so we recognize, or I recognize, that television really is this system, this interesting system of storytelling, right? It is part and parcel of our daily lives. It cultivates from infancy the very predispositions and preferences that have become the primary common source of socialization and everyday information. Even if we don't like television, we don't watch television, that's not our thing. At some point, there's going to be some sort of engagement and interaction that you have with images of your life or whatever has been deemed your life depicted on screen. And so we actually have to grapple with that, right? We have to actually say, you know, is that really true? Or is this something that somebody has just kind of created out of thin air? Or am I now living vicariously through those characters because it seems as though that is the way that a young white girl should live in college, right? So it's all those different things that we're constantly grappling with on a routine basis. And so our centering our focus for our time together really is to understand, unpack, and examine complex narratives of social cultural identities portrayed on screen. And so I'm hoping that you'll have a little fun with me where we'll activate, leaning into the conference theme a little bit, our social cultural perspectives as it relates to our cultural rootedness. We'll also reimagine and envision alternative narrative on screen for ourselves. And we'll also really get into the big question of what is the possibility of progress in America while holding fast to how we individually and collectively show up, right? So, really big things. We are not coming from a one size fits all model. We all have very distinct things that make us us. And so, how do we actually appreciate that as individuals and as collectives? So, all of this work is really rooted into this West African principle called Sankofa. And so Sankofa means to go back and fetch it. That's the very common phrase that's used to define the term. But also just go back to the past in order to build for the future. So how do we actually understand the past in order to contend with the present, to be able to really say, okay, I can seize and take on whatever the future has in store for me ahead. So as we activate ourselves, I would like for you to breathe in with me just a tad. And so we have a little bit of an activity. I would like for you to explore, where do you come from? What's your hometown? What's the story connected to your name? What's your skin color or hue or ethnicity and race? What's your gender expression or identity? Any faith or spiritual practice that you may have, or any other identity marker that speaks to you. Okay. So, with that, I would like for you to describe up to 3 identity markers as a food item or a meal. So, I'm going to give you an opportunity to think about it for a second. And then you can use the chat and we can also speak aloud. Please do not be afraid to unmute yourself and to just share out. But I want you to process this a little bit and then let's actually share out. Okay. So, where do you come from? Hometown, the story that's connected to your name. And maybe there might not be a story that's connected to your name. Your skin color, hue, ethnicity, or race, your gender expression or identity, your faith or spiritual practice, or any other identity marker that you have. How would you describe at least one of those? And of course, I'm asking at least up to 3, but at least one of those as a food item or meal. So, any thoughts coming to your minds thus far? Okay. I see Hannah is thinking intently. Both Hannahs are thinking intently. Yes. So, any identity marker that you have, describe it as a food item. So, I'm going to give you just one. I'm not going to give all of my goodies away, but I'm going to do my skin hue. So, um, I would describe myself as a caramel cake, and that's picking up on the hue of my skin. Okay. You're most welcome.
I think I have one for me.
Okay.
I think I describe of just where I come from as sort of like leftovers crock pot soup,
Okay.
that gets made from everything that's kind of happened and put together, but makes a really delicious, warm, hearty stew.
Absolutely. Nice. Okay, now I like that. Yes, Lisa.
I kind of did some food for the day.
Okay. No problem.
I mean, I thought we would start our morning with a cappuccino
Nice. Gotcha.
and then maybe go for a stroll and have a beaver tail.
Okay.
And
I like.
then end our evening with some oysters.
Oh, all right now.
And I can explain all those things if you want me to.
Sure, go right for it. I actually can. I'm imagining a whole bunch of different things, but I would love to hear your explanation.
Amazing. I am Afro-Canadian, an Afro-Canadian cis woman. So
Okay.
cappuccino referring to the skin tone that I have, beaver tail referring to my being from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada.
Yep.
For those of you who don't know, it's not actually a beaver tail. It's
No,
a
it's
with cinnamon and sugar sprinkled on top. That's only available in Canada usually, or countries adjacent to or cities adjacent to Canada. And oysters referring to my gender.
nice, nice. I love it. I totally love it. Dope. Thank you.
I think I have one. I think I would say matzo ball soup. I think I can tie that to faith because I'm Jewish.
Yes.
And it feels like a homey meal.
Mhm.
And I don't know, like the pale hue of the matzo balls. I'm kind of pale. I can link those.
Awesome, awesome. I love it. I love it. Any other expressions that you want to bring to the floor?
I could say that I would be kielbasa and macaroni and cheese.
Okay. All right now. I definitely like kielbasa. Very nice. Love it. Okay. Any reasons why you picked those?
Well, genuine kielbasa was a highly desirable dish for my father.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother is kind of Mayflower. So it's like the all-American dish.
Yes. Absolutely. Beautiful. I love it. I love it.
Mine was a pierogi, and because it's wrapped in sort of a plain white noodle, right? Pastry noodle, whatever. But you don't know what's inside unless you dig a little bit. So that sort of speaks to my like a little bit of shyness that I have, maybe introvertedness perhaps. But inside there could be onions or sauerkraut or spices or some kind of cheese or like lots of possibilities in there. So that's mine.
Dope. I love it. I so love it. So thinking about what you all have shared, kind of reflect on just within your person how it made you feel to really consider, your identity marker, right? Instead of just saying, well, I'm black, I'm this, I'm that, essentially, how did it make you feel to actually think of a food item that generally, for most of actually all of you, it was tied to some sort of aspect of culture? How did that actually resonate within your person, right? It does something for you, especially for those who shared out. Your body language shifted, your energy kind of felt on high. Even if you weren't on camera, I could feel you smiling, which is very powerful when you start thinking about your identity and all of its complexities, and complexities not in a negative but in a positive, and how you feel as though that those things could actually be represented on screen. in a way where you're just like, wow, I can really connect with so and so, or I could really, I really like this show, because there's something about it that makes you feel at peace. It gives you that harmony, that just really kind of makes everything feel full, for you. Okay, so keep hold of that. We're going to keep going. We're going to keep trucking along. So when we think about culture, Eggershine gives us three layers or levels of culture. And for the purposes of course, this graphic, I have kind of just spelled it out horizontally. But if you can imagine this graphic more so represented as a triangle, where each aspect of the triangle is pretty much equally separated. The first that I'm going to just kind of hint at or touch upon is the basic underlying assumptions. And so when we think about culture, the first layer that Eggershine just kind of draws our attention to is that there are a lot of unconscious, take it for granted beliefs and values that define your culture, right? This is things that you can't necessarily, go to a book and you're going to get all the details about, well, what are the unconscious beliefs of X, Y, and Z culture. This is that underlying, those assumptions that make up the essence of you. That second layer is the espoused beliefs and values. These are the ideals, these are the aspirations, the goals, the rationalizations. They may or may not be congruent with behavior or the artifacts, but these are those things that kind of give you that additional base in terms of understanding your culture in itself and all of its manifestations. And then the third layer, that top layer, are the artifacts. And oftentimes, what happens when people start talking about culture, they immediately focus on the things, the objects, which really is not the essence of what culture is. Really, the essence of it really sits within the espoused beliefs and values and the basic underlying assumptions. The artifacts are those visible and feelable elements, but they're not the primary component, right? It's just that top layer when we talk about the wholeness of understanding culture. It's the observed behavior, that difficult to decipher component. Now, the interesting thing is that when we really actually breathe into all of our different cultures, really understanding where our parents came from, or our grandparents came from, or great grandparents, really understanding what they had, what they really relied upon, and how that culture may have been stripped down over the years as they either came to America or were living in certain parts of America and felt as though they could not be their authentic selves. And so they basically said, I'm going to disguise my language. I'm not going to really breathe into my actual, the way in which I speak, because it seems to be a little bit off-putting, right? Or I may not get certain benefits, because I'm living in America and I don't want to be cut off from certain things. So I disguise the way that I actually speak. Or, you may have some individuals who will say, I'm not going to wear my hair a particular way. I'm going to, dye it blonde. I may even get contacts to make sure that they're blue, because I don't want someone to actually recognize the essence of me. And then be, disadvantaged from certain benefits that other Americans are assumed to have, right? So all those different things kind of play into our understanding of culture when we really actually take a deep breath of, well, what are all the different components of, me? And going more than just saying, what kind of tapestries do we have on our walls in our homes, but really actually having those in-depth conversations to understand what happened to our people over the years. This ties us back to that term that I gave you a little bit earlier called Sankofa, right? Going back to fetch it. To be able to bring it forward. Yes, it's a West African term, but it's applicable to any culture that is here today. Truly, it's not specific to any particular culture. And so another element to all of this is, there's an industrial psychologist by the name of Edwin J. Nichols, who did a lot of time. He spent a lot of time just observing different ethnic groups. And he came up with this chart called the philosophical aspects of cultural difference, connection to the past and present and the future. And he has this is a basic chart. Now he has a massive chart that has tons of other elements tied to it, but for our purposes I've just given you kind of the essence of what his work sits in. Understanding the axiology or the values, the epistemology or the ways of knowing, the logic base or the principles of reason, and the processing, which is the practice of reasoning for all of these ethnic groups. Now, of course, reading the chart, you would say, well, I feel like, there's some aspects of Native American culture or indigenous people's culture that I relate to, I connect to. And so there's no harm in that. Yes, we all do, right? The essence of this chart is really focused more on where the highest values are actually placed, right? So if you were to really do an assessment of any kind of situation, what would you get when you look at a European or Euro American individual? What would that actually span out to be? The beautiful thing also about this chart is that you can actually take one aspect, one ethnic group, and say, I want to dig even deeper into what does it actually mean. So one of the interesting aspects for, let's say, African American, Latino or Latina or Arab Americans is the logic base or the principle of reasoning for that group. And so the term that he gives is diunital, right? The union of opposites. So when you're having conversations with any person within that ethnic group, there we don't see opposites as two different sides of the spectrum. Literally, opposites are all kind of intertwined and working and having conversations with one another. And it's not a either or, it's a and, right? It's both and. And so just thinking about how the processing of that impacts every aspect of our lived experiences. The interesting thing is that when I observed and did the analysis of American television since the 1930s to present, the biggest area that you can, of course, imagine that took over or dominated is the European concepts and ideology. And so, when you're watching television or when you're even just exploring different situations, this idea of dichotomous, like it always has to be this either or type of thing. And so it can be very troubling for an individual who does not see the world like that, right? They're just like, what do you mean? It's got to be one or the other. I can't have both. And so it does something psychologically to a person trying to actually understand, well, what do you mean I can't have both, right? And I gotta pick one? No, it can't work like that. And so I challenged myself to say, well, what would a world look like where you didn't necessarily, we didn't have this dichotomous situation, but more so of an opportunity to have different options, different or have opposites kind of playing at the same time and allowing people to gravitate to what they need to for themselves. Huge question. I don't know what that could look like in everyday life and existence, but it's something for us to actually breathe into, right? Or one other one that I'll pick is uh, the symbolic imagery and rhythm for Black individuals. And so the way that we know things and as well as how we process things generally relies on this symbolic rhythm and imagery. And so I'll give you a very basic example of this. If you're having a conversation with somebody and they said, you know what, I had a dream last night and they said to go left. And so in your mind, you're like, all right, so yeah, so and so said go left. Then the next day you had another conversation with somebody and they said, you know what, I was just talking to somebody and they said go left. And so here you are hearing this information again, like, it must be something to this going left. And then you have another conversation that says something else about going left. The way that we process, the way we know that we know that we know, if you've ever heard that expression, essentially is this rhythm, this pacing, this imagery that's kind of, painted on high for us to actually say, I'm okay. I'm good. I can actually accept what was being offered. And sometimes people will say, I think God is trying to tell me something, right? You know, those kind of expressions tend to come out. Not to say that no other ethnic or cultural group would experience that as well. It's just that for African Americans, Latinos, and Arabs, that tends to be a very high peak for us in terms of understand how we know something to be true, accurate, real, for us, you know, for us to be able to accept it. So I know this is of course is going more, we can go deeper into this work, but I just wanted to give you a taste of what this actually looks like and feels like when we start talking about culture and identity. And not necessarily trying to say there's a hierarchy of who's greater than or less than. Of course, society does that to us on a routine basis, but how do we actually accept and be able to breathe into all of what everyone has to offer, especially when we see our narratives portrayed on screen. Okay, thank you. So, with this, I want us to have another playtime together, and we're going to do some reimagination. And hopefully, you're willing to be creative with me. And the process that I would like for us to take is thinking about a favorite or remembered television series that you are familiar with, or consider the actors of a series or a film that you really like or admire, right? So just think of that. I'm sure you're kind of percolating with something going on in your mind. Okay, cool. And so the images that I have reflected on the screen right now, there was a similar activity that was done. And of course, this particular person decided to post them on social media. And so this is a time where I think social media can actually be fun and interesting and engaging. And a similar activity was given. And so the person came up with actors that they were familiar with. And so they also put next to that actor different characteristics of a storyline that was also presented, which we'll have an opportunity to play with in a moment. And so, as you can see, the woman that's reflected here is Angela Bassett. And so, for this particular storyline, um, she is someone who teaches principles of magical law in the 21st century. She's the object of every male freshman's desire. She's a fashion icon, and something you probably would hear her say is, "Stop it, I'm old enough to be your grandmother." Okay? So, this is someone actually playing in the reimagination space a little bit of a character that they have, or a person, an actor that they've seen on screen. Or the other one, you probably have recognized him from the Reading Rainbow. They have characterized this individual as the university librarian. He knows where every book is. He's very patient and memorizes every student's name. So, the storyline that this particular individual played with was you had to think of Black actors who were faculty or staff at an HBCU that had a magical universe. Okay? So essentially, that was the storyline that they decided to reimagine. We're going to play a little bit with that right now. So, I would like for you to consider a group of scientists and researchers. They don't necessarily have to be scientists or researchers at a magical state institution. Think of a character, because you're going to create your meme. Essentially, these are memes. Think of an actor or an actress that you admire, and kind of come up with some characteristics about that individual for this magical state institution. Okay. And it can be as completely imaginative as you would like for it to be. So think through that a little bit. If you want me to rephrase it, I can rephrase it. But you're creating a meme. So don't think too hard. Allow yourself to just reimagine anything or play into a classic character that you know. Okay. I'm going to put one that I'm thinking in the chat, and you are more than welcome to add to it. Okay. Oops. Let me stop the share so I don't go to the next slide. There we go. All right, so at our magical state institution, the character that I'm going to throw out here first is Christopher Lloyd, also known as Doc from Back to the Future. So if you've ever seen the film Back to the Future. So I played into his character a little bit. He's always creating mini explosives in the lab, has a keen sense of knowing what you are going to say before you say it, and all of the students pass the class with an A. Okay. Who else are we thinking about?
I think I have a little bit starting of one. We're sharing now, right? Is that correct? Yeah. Well, I really like Star Wars and the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So I was thinking of Samuel L. Jackson.
Mm.
And so he would be the professor. He's on tenure, and so the admin can't really do much about him. And so he's always teaching these spells to students that maybe are a little questionable, but kind of gets the job done in a roundabout way. But no one can do anything about it because he's on tenure, and he, maybe he is the advisor for like a magical student group. Is their professor advisor for a student group.
Nice, dope, very nice, love it. Okay, from Manifest, yes. Okay. Interesting. In a test tube, nice. Nice, I like it, I like that. Okay, we had Trevor Noah was another, and then Jamie Kaufman, very creative on academics. Okay, cool, cool, awesome. I also thought of Robin Williams. I thought that he would be an instructor at the institution that creates these potions that produce constant laughter. And no one can understand what his combination is. But every time you go into his class, it's always laughter happening. Um, and Robin always enjoys debating in a friendly way. And it's so weird because while you're debating, you're also laughing at the same time, because he has this magical potion that's creating laughter on a constant basis. And the other interesting element about him is that he never remembers his lessons for class. So it's kind of whatever happens in the moment works for Professor Robin Williams. Cool beans. Yes, fun, fun, fun. So as we think about these memes, or these opportunities to kind of just say, you know what, I just want to reimagine something a little bit. When we watch things on screen, really that's the ultimate challenge. You're actually trying to say, is this believable? Can I accept what's actually being presented to me? Or do I want to just take a moment to say, we need to rethink this. We need to reimagine the narrative that's actually being portrayed on screen. And how can we have fun with it, but at the same time, make sure that we're appreciating the essence of who we are at this, all together, right? It doesn't seem like there are these weird isolated elements that are happening. And so the biggest question that I have for everybody is this ability to transform. You know, what is this possibility of progress for all of us? And it's a constant question. And I don't think we've gotten to a point where we can answer it plainly and concretely for ourselves. It's an evolving question. I think in many, especially if we think about these interesting terms, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it becomes a reoccurring thing that, is always on the plates. People want to say, well, what are the best practices? Or what are those things that we need to be doing on a routine basis? And really, the it's not so much that's the question, it's more of how do we need to constantly check in? How do we need to, what do we need to do to make sure that we're all a part of the conversation? And even though one issue may take precedence at that time, we're not quieting any other issues that may still be afoot, right? So how do we keep that energy moving and percolating throughout our days? And so to me, that's the essence of creating the transformative ability, so that we can actually hold fast to how we show up individually and collectively. And one of the things that really captivated me as just in my research, but also just in just general reflection, is this quote right here. What became of the black people of Sumer? The traveler asks the old man. For ancient records show that the people of Sumer were black. What happened to them? Ah, the old man sighed. They lost their history, so they died. So that quote truly resonates with me on so many different levels. But the biggest piece that it draws back to for me is how do we actually make sure we stay connected? We stay connected to our ancestral backgrounds, or our cultural backgrounds. We stay connected to what's happened presently, as well as understanding how to actually move the needle forward at the same time. Because it is never a good thing for people to lose their history and feel completely out of place or disconnected. Um, Even in with this image right here, the image itself, of course, yes, it is me. It is my wedding day, but it is me connected to my father. And of course, he is still with us. He has not transitioned. But there's this constant motivation of understanding the importance of being able to go back, that whole essence of Sankofa, going back to really listen to those stories, understanding what were the things that were happening of the past that really do impact your cultural identity, your lived experiences, and how do those experiences impact literally everything that we consume. Because television is that main vehicle that literally feeds every aspect of our lives. And so it's so interesting to me that, when we think about where there could be these opportunities of disconnection, you have this very awkward sense of belonging, right? We shouldn't feel like we're awkwardly connected to, what we are, who we are, and how we actually could see ourselves in the future. Doesn't really do us well or serve us well. So we have a lot of work that we have to do internally and collectively to make sure that we don't end up like the people of Sumer, where they've lost their history and then they died, right? We have to be very cognizant to not allow society to constantly say, well, you know what? Everybody needs to just fall in line and just be on the conveyor belt. And, we're just going to just keep producing the same chocolate cookie over and over and over again. We can actually have some complexity and some diversity and be okay with that. It's all good. And still be able to live a very full life at the same time. And so, of course, I leave you with, some questions that you can think about. We can have a conversation about, or you might just say, I just want to mellow out for a moment. But the essence of this is to really be able to say, when we look at things on television, how do we challenge ourselves to engage with those narratives to shift the conversation? Because even though TV may be saying this is what this type of person may be, we actually hold the power of actually shifting the conversation in the ways in which we portray ourselves, whether it's via social media or whether we decide that we want to create a new movement. And movement meaning, whether it's when I remember vividly actually when everyone decided to wear the pink caps and they were all downtown in Washington, D.C. That was a movement change. That was a cultural shift. That was women and men who were honoring the essence of who we were as individuals and saying, look, we're not going to be quiet anymore, right? We're going to reframe or change the narrative of what it means to be a feminist, right? And so those types of things, that's where we can rally around and see that culture shift, right? And then begin to see how things evolve on the television screen as well, versus allowing ourselves to take the back seat and have society dictate to us who we should be, why we should be, what, all these different things. And it's like, well, I don't connect to that at all, right? And so the essence of this too is really challenging us. How do we embrace our individual and collective selves, right? And it's not so much about being individualistic, because I think American culture in general will definitely have you hyped up on, just be you. And being you is cool. However, the way we be ourselves, um, it doesn't necessarily have to feel like it's this, you know, we're just casting off this group of individuals as they just be themselves, and we don't necessarily engage with that authentically. I think millennials and centennials experience that a lot, because we may be those individuals who come up in a space and say, you know what, I actually don't like that. And so it kind of gets cast as you're being too individualistic. But really what it is that we're trying to carve out our space to really say this is who we really need to be. And so, how do we embrace that individualism and at the same time embrace our collective nature, that we also offer? And so, I'll just conclude with what I challenged myself to do, in particular during my doctoral study, is create a television series that did just that. So how do we get ourselves out of this weirdness of being able to find, fit in these weird formulaic strategies of these narratives of Black people, Asian people, Latinx people, etc., and really actually breathe into the real lived authentic experiences of a group of individuals from Mound Bayou, Mississippi, right? And so that's what I did for myself, to say I need to challenge this thinking, so that I'm not falling prey to just accepting whatever is actually portrayed on screen. So I hope these questions kind of give you something to actually chew on and to think about, and also connects you back to our initial activity that we started off with, regarding the identities in food. Something about that was very interesting, because I watched all of you just kind of find this interesting spark to say, I never thought about me like this. And so how do we hold fast to that in the other spaces that we occupy, on a day-to-day basis? And so I am definitely open to receiving any questions, if you have them. And I can stay around for our later time for discussion as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ashley Campbell. Amazing. So we do have a few more minutes, so please just turn on your microphone or put things in the chat if you have questions or comments.
I know one thing I find interesting about like television, I guess it's probably a little bit more on like marketing and advertising, but I always mute commercials because I just don't like the noise. And when I mute them, you really get an idea of the story that they're selling. And I just always find it fascinating of like, oh wow, I guess you have to have, Charmin toilet paper to be a happy family, or something like that. Like you really kind of get an interesting sense of things. And I try to bring that, to the content that I, more passively watch or, enjoy for entertainment as well.
Absolutely.
But yeah, once you start kind of thinking about these things and asking these questions that you brought to our attention, yeah, you can really see sort of the ideas and the life that's portrayed and sold, and then analyze, is that the life I want? Is that the life I have? Like, yeah, so I find all this stuff that you talked about really fascinating. So thank you.
You're welcome. Yes. All those good questions. And yes, I've thought the same thing about the Charmin commercials.
Some of you won't remember the show Lassie.
Yes, I have watched episodes. Yes.
I remember watching it when I was a child and seeing how the family was and how the dog was. It wasn't even close to my family life and my experience. And I remember asking myself the question, why don't they come do a television program on my own family?
Right.
But it created at a very young age, it created a feeling of I'm not good enough.
Yes.
I don't measure up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing that I remember that I discovered once had children and I started watching Walt Disney movies again,
Mm-hmm.
was that there was a lot of dangerous information that was portrayed there that I just listened to and never questioned when I was a kid. My parents didn't interact with me on it.
Mm-mm.
But once I'm watching it as an adult, I was like, oh, that's bad.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's there's no way to undo that once that's deep in there.
Mm-mm.
It creates all kinds of expectations that aren't even close to real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Very, very true.
I think the power is underestimated of the mass media that TV provides. And I think there are a lot of good things happening in terms of like how there are more realistic, complex relationships and stories and families and all that. But at the same time, there's also so much violence and so much like graphic, like I don't know, I do worry about that. So part of me wants to go back to the past a little bit in terms of that. And maybe this makes me feel old or seem old or whatever, but on the other hand, there's so much dangerous stuff that's hidden in those past shows and things like that that is even more dangerous in some ways, right? So it's like, wow, just having the it's just so powerful. And I just hope that artists continue to be aware of how much their voice can infiltrate, society,
Mm-hmm.
and especially on that mass level, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I guess riffing off of what you just shared, a question was posed in the chat to me about the impact of on the audience, watching various narratives on screen. And so there's, of course, it's quite a bit of research and it can get very scientific, but I'll try to pick a situation or something that is very, digestible. So I recently read an analysis of a popular television series called Grey's Anatomy. The creator, executive producer is Shonda Rhimes, who also has tons of other television shows on screen. And there was an analysis done of the characters that were portrayed. And so when that show first aired, there were quite a few Black doctors that were actually featured. And then she also had Shonda did an excellent job of being able to incorporate other narratives of other identities as the key figures of the TV show. And some of the response rate really showed, of course, high vibrations for your white characters and very medium, even kill type of responses to your Black characters. And a lot of the response is that it was kind of like hard for people to wrap their minds around seeing Black doctors, in the positions that they occupied on screen. And what Shonda decided to do as a response to that, she actually shared out her process for actually getting actors. And so for her, she doesn't have scripts that say, okay, this is for a 35-year-old Black male with locks. Like, she wouldn't do that. Her casting was very different. Her philosophy is that here's a character, the name is X, Y, and Z, you make the character come to life. And so essentially it could be anybody who fulfills these different roles. So that her response, her doing that or revealing that, it actually was a shift that she experienced in seeing the reviews or the responses to the characters that were portrayed. So interesting shift from the first time where people are just watching it and saying, this just doesn't make any sense. And then hearing her, which of course she didn't have to share this information, but hearing her actually share, this is how I do the casting process, and that we don't do call outs for certain types of demographic characters in order to fulfill the characters that we've outlined or written in the script. The response shifted. And so people had a warmer response and reception to characters who were of color, or characters who had a visible disability, or characters who had a different sexual orientation. It was almost as if it was a complete flip. People wanted to see those narratives actually portrayed on screen. So it's just interesting how that impact plays into many things. I don't think that the television industry quite yet has gotten to a point where you can say you could really breathe into the breath of an entire series and say we actually witness this particular niche cultural group shift from this to that, really kind of doing that kind of analysis. I haven't quite seen that yet. And I would love to see that work actually done, where there's an intentionality of what is the actual social impact that's happening with the community of individuals. And so hopefully that answers your question that you posed, Lisa. Yes. Cool beans, cool beans. But yeah. And it's interesting that analysis happens all the time. There's one other show, and it just hit me, so I do apologize for getting a little excited. But there is one other show that most people are familiar with. It's called Family Matters. And so Family Matters was actually the longest running Black television series of all Black TV shows. Interesting. Didn't know that. And so Family Matters aired for 9 seasons, which is really, that's a significant period of time. Your average successful show, air quotes, will last at least 6 seasons. 7 seasons is really good as well. But essentially, you give a show about 6 seasons to last on air. And the writers were actually mostly white. There was a sprinkle of a few Black writers in the room, and there will be a few episodes where there would be this very visceral reaction with audience or the viewers. And so there's this episode where the main character, Carl Winslow, he's a police officer, and his son, who's Black, gets stopped by the police. The writing of that particular episode demonstrated that Carl didn't pay attention to the fact that you actually are raising a Black young man. And the writers in the room said, we need to just do the scene as if any police officer would address their son. And the Black writers in the room, which was really only one, said, that doesn't feel authentic, right? Because even if you have a Black police officer as a dad, their response would be more authentic to what is the actual experience of being Black in America versus basically saying, well, what did you do to get stopped by the police? So it's a different, the authentic reality of how that scene would have played out in, real time would have not necessarily put all the onus on the son, who really wasn't in the wrong. He gets stopped by the police, if I'm remembering correctly, because of the car he was driving. And so the infraction is that essentially you rolled through a stop sign, and that really was not what happened. He stopped at the stop sign, and essentially the police stopped him because he didn't think that a Black man of his stature, his age, should have been driving the kind of car that he was driving. So that's a real type of everyday situation. And to have your dad, who's a police, say, well, what did you do? Just did not land well. And so the Black writers in the room just didn't necessarily think that was a good representation or an authentic representation of the lived experiences of Black people. And so the audience viewership or response to that rather was a little like, I don't know if I would have said that to my son. and so it actually creates a little bit distrust in the character. And long time ago, they used to be able to measure, how people respond to characters when they say certain lines and all that kind of stuff. Some of that technology has been removed. But essentially, during that time when that episode aired, they were able to see that Black response was just like, ooh, that didn't land well, essentially. So, very interesting and fascinating stuff when you start thinking about what narrative is actually demonstrated and how we actually believe what we're seeing. So, yes.
Amazing.